Dark forces is a big, expansive term that includes all of the negative dark entities, non-beneficial entities, spiritual entities, as well as non-beneficial malevolent ETs, and even dark human forces like elements of the cabal. The dark forces encapsulates all of that big umbrella. So today, as we're talking about dark forces, we're not just talking about, quote, demons, but which a lot of people kind of just fall into everything is demons, right? But we're talking about like all of it, all of the negative spiritual forces. So somebody can have a situation where maybe they're not under psychic attack by a person who's mad at them, but they happen to be a very heavily targeted individual by the dark forces in general. The person maybe has a very bright spiritual light about them, or maybe they have a really important spiritual mission in this lifetime, and that is a threat to the dark forces. So the person is going along trying to live their life. They haven't done anything to hurt anybody, and yet the dark forces in general, this general force, is really blasting that person with, all sorts of negative energies that can come through a variety of sources.
Welcome to a Broaderlenspodcast.
Opinions expressed on Broaderlenspodcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlenspodcast. Maya, thanks for coming on Broaderlenspodcast again. It's an honor to have you. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for having me on again, and it's so wonderful to see you again and to catch up. I think you're a beautiful soul doing great things with your podcast.
Oh, thank you, and vice versa. Thank you what you do, because what you do is it's a topic you normally don't hear in the spiritual communities, but it's a must, in my opinion. It's powerful. We decided to talk about your book, the Psychic Attack source book, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Chapter 5.
my second book, the Psychic Attack source book. We're gonna dive into chapter 5 today.
Yeah, thank you. Before we get started, maybe we could share a little bit about what a psychic attack is for those who may have missed our first episode on this, and your situation and how this all came about.
Sure, absolutely. So I forgot to mention, chapter 5 is all about the tactics of the dark forces, which we'll get into in a little bit. But yes, a little bit of some basic definition, and then also how I got into this work. So a psychic attack is a basic umbrella term that we use for any time negative energy is sent toward a person. So this can happen in a variety of ways. Psychic attack can happen when a person sends negative energy to another person through their angry or non-beneficial feelings, thoughts, energies that they're ruminating about, thinking about that person, and purposely or not purposely sending that energy. So our thoughts and our emotions are really powerful. So if somebody is feeling a lot of rage or resentment or negative emotions towards somebody, and they're just feeling it and seething and ruminating about it, if the person on the receiving end is sensitive, they're going to feel it, and it will feel as though they're being psychically attacked, because they are. So that's more of like an emotional psychic attack sent by somebody's thoughts and feelings and emotions. But then there's also the psychic attack that can be sent by a person who has some knowledge in black magic, negative spell work, etc. And so they do some occult practices of any flavor, black magic of, whatever style that they happen to do. and they will do that against their enemy in order to create a psychic attack, in order to harm that targeted individual. So, there's so many reasons why someone might want to do that. I don't think there's any legitimate reason to purposely psychically attack someone, but people think they have their reasons. Another form of this is also when someone doesn't have that knowledge of magic, so they hire a practitioner of the dark arts to do it for them. And there are plenty of practitioners who will take money and do a curse on your ex-lover or whatever. It's definitely not something of integrity, but it does happen way more than people realize. I think one thing that I want to just mention here is that this is something that a lot of people think, and I used to think it too, that I would never dream of harming somebody in that way. So I assumed that other people would not ever do that to me. And that's just not true. Even if your viewers would never dream of doing black magic against their enemy, that doesn't mean that other people wouldn't do it to them. So we have to remember that. I'll also mention there's other forms of psychic attack where there's maybe not a person doing the psychic attack, but there's an entity, one or more entities, spiritual beings that are attacking a person. And that's another form of psychic attack. And then we expand it even more to the term that I use, the term that I started using several years ago. I say dark forces. Dark forces is a big, expansive term that includes all of the negative dark entities, non-beneficial entities, spiritual entities, as well as non-beneficial malevolent ETs, and even dark human forces like elements of the cabal. The dark forces encapsulates all of that big umbrella. So today, as we're talking about dark forces, we're not just talking about, quote, demons, but which a lot of people kind of just fall into everything as demons, right? But we're talking about like all of it, all of the negative spiritual forces. So somebody can have a situation where maybe they're not under psychic attack by a person who's mad at them, but they happen to be a very heavily targeted individual by the dark forces in general. The person maybe has a very bright spiritual light about them, or maybe they have a really important spiritual mission in this lifetime, and that is a threat to the dark forces. So the person is going along trying to live their life. They haven't done anything to hurt anybody, and yet the dark forces in general, this general force, is really blasting that person with, all sorts of negative energies that can come through a variety of sources. And that's a whole other topic, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. There's so many ways that targeting can happen. So I didn't talk about... Oh, yeah, go ahead, Boo-Boo.
Well, you're bringing up the dark forces, but what's coming to mind for me and maybe the listeners is, where's the light forces? Where's God in all this? People may be asking.
Excellent question. So back in 2016, when I had my additional spiritual awakening that blew my mind open to realizing that my belief that there's pretty much only light forces and dark forces don't exist. I had that belief that's so common. I came to realize firsthand when I came under attack by a false light entity, a dark entity posing to be a council of angels, that I began to question everything. And I went into a couple of years of existential crisis, just to be totally transparent. I was like, oh my gosh, who's in charge? Where are the benevolent forces? I thought that, why would these negative things be allowed to happen? So I do believe that there are benevolent forces. I still believe that there are. I don't think that the universe is set up how some people would, how like the positive vibers would like to think, because there is a lot of negativity going on in the universe, in the cosmos. And there, even though there are positive forces, even though creator source does exist, there's kind of this there's two things. There's kind of a neutrality where, like our guardian angels, our guides, they don't jump in always to block a psychic attack. A lot of times those things are allowed to happen. And through all of my angst and years of existential crisis, there's a couple things that I figured out. One is that the benevolent forces follow the cosmic laws. For example, they won't infringe on our free will. They will stand back and allow us to learn our soul mission lessons, etc. The negative forces have no interest in following cosmic laws, and so they will figure out loopholes and any ways that they can break the laws that they can, because they don't care. So what I have discerned is that actually gives the negative forces a leg up, because the benevolent forces are following cosmic laws, and these negative forces are just like throwing caution to the wind and doing whatever they can get away with. And so then it makes it seem like the dark forces are in charge. I don't think they are in charge, but there's a lot more negativity going on in the world than I would prefer. So this belief that God wouldn't allow any of that to happen to you, unfortunately, that's not the reality of what's happening. And a colleague of mine, lovely lady, she was posting on her Facebook recently about how we shouldn't be focusing so much on dark forces and negative spirituality, because if we just focus on the light, then the dark cannot touch us. And that's actually one of the myths that's very common in pop spirituality today, is that if you just focus on light, focus on positivity, then the dark forces can't touch you. And I go into this in my book, the Psychic Attack Source Book. It's actually not, unfortunately, I don't want to burst people's bubble, but it's actually a myth. It's not true. And the reason why I know this is not true is because I've had thousands of people come to me over the years who were and are genuine, earnest, spiritual seekers who genuinely believed what my colleague posted, which is if you just focus on light, the dark can't touch you. And yet they were getting blasted by the dark forces. And so not only were they dealing with the attack, whatever attack level of attack they were dealing with, but they also were going into major existential crisis, because this belief that they had that they were protected wasn't true. So that they realized so many things that they believed about how the universe works were actually not true. So I will say the work that I do is important, but it's definitely not, it's not popular. It's not happy news. You know what I mean? People come to me when they need, when they're going through really terrible situations, and they've gone to other spiritual healers who've told them, well, just focus on light, just focus on goodness, and then they're still getting blasted by whatever type of psychic attack they're dealing with. And then they finally find me because I don't think I'm the only person doing this work, but I think I am one of the few people who is working in the spiritual world, in the spiritual field, who's not afraid to speak up about these realities. And then these people, the clients, are able to actually get help. So that is the big existential question that you asked, which is, where are the benevolent forces, right? They are present. I have had a lot of experience with both benevolent forces, but the dark forces attacks still happen. There's a lot of people under attack, and I will just wrap this part up by saying I don't have the ultimate answer to that question, Boo Boo, because I'm still seeking. Like, why is it? I mean, I gave sort of some answers here, but why is it that the dark forces are allowed to get away with so much? And I don't know, except for the fact that aspect that I shared a little while ago about how they don't follow the cosmic laws, and the benevolent forces do.
Yeah, thank you. In chapter 5, you have a list about symptoms of having spirit attachments. Before we get in, maybe you can touch on what an entity attachment is.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so an entity attachment is when a spiritual being, a non-living being in spiritual form, is attached to a person. A person can have one or several entities attached to them, so it's not always just one. In fact, when somebody has one, often it opens them up to several. And the entity can be either hanging out in the person's energy field, just out here in their aura, or attached by a tether, attached via an energy cord. A lot of times it will attach to the back of the head and give thoughts to the person to nudge the person to think a certain way or act a certain way. And the person will think that those thoughts are theirs. And meanwhile, it's actually coming through that energy cord. Another way that there can be an entity attachment is if the entity actually enters into the person's physical body, which we would consider a possession. So just a couple of symptoms of an entity attachment. When the attachment is first starting, when the entity is first coming into a person's energy field, they will often feel one of these two symptoms. The first is the person might suddenly feel disoriented and dizzy and woozy, and that is because there is a sudden drop to the person's vibration. And when there's a sudden change up or down to a person's vibration, it will often make the person feel really dizzy and disoriented and lightheaded. The other opposite symptom that a person might have would be feelings of euphoria when the entity comes into the person's field. Some entities are very clever, and they will emit a frequency that fills the person with feelings of bliss. And this is what one of my past mentors calls spiritual anesthetic. So it fills the person with bliss. So let's say a person is at a spiritual event where they're channeling a bunch of messages, and they're calling in a bunch of spiritual beings that they think are benevolent beings, and they're not using proper discernment, and they're actually negative beings that are coming in, false light entities that are pretending to be benevolent. And then the individual, or maybe lots of people at the event, are being filled with this sensation of bliss and euphoria. And I'm not talking about a grounded feeling of upliftment. Feeling grounded and uplifted is a sign of a beneficial type of situation. But when it's like a spaced out euphoria bliss, that it's usually very ungrounded, and that's a sign that an entity is trying to hook in to your energy field. So if you're at home meditating and you're like, Ascended Master Saint Germain has shown up to be my spirit guide, and this is so amazing, and you're filled with these feelings of bliss, that's a red flag that it's actually not, and it's not a genuine ascended master. It's a trickster entity. And it is actually it's trying to be a spirit attachment. It's trying to hook into your energy field. So that's a little bit about what a spirit attachment is. And then I ended up talking about false light entities, which are something that I talk about a lot. All of the tricksters that are really common in today's day and age. And then the symptoms of how to know when a spirit is coming into your energy field, the feeling of disorientation or bliss and euphoria.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And in chapter 5, you talked about before we get into your list of their strategies, which I love. There's so much good stuff in here. You said there's a countless type of beings of these dark forces. Have you seen any, or can you give us a little help broaden our lens on all these different types?
Yes. Okay. I love how you said broaden our lens because of the name of your podcast. That's awesome. So just for the sake of your audience, just to let everybody know, I am clairvoyant, which means that I can see energies and entities, and which is like good and bad because I see the negative stuff too. But for me personally, I want to know what I'm dealing with. I want to see it. Not everybody wants to see it, and I totally respect that. So with my clairvoyant abilities and my other psychic senses where I can sense things in other ways, and there's auditory senses and feelings and that all of that, I have had numerous experiences with lots of different kinds of entities. And so I have a really good feel for how different entities show up. So when I'm working with a new client, for example, they can tell me what's going on with their situation, and I can tune in psychically, and we basically CSI whiteboard the situation. We go, okay, what's going on? And we're able to determine exactly what kind of entity or entities they're dealing with, which is really cool. So I'll start off with the negative entity that most people think of, and that's demons. And I think when I was a teenager was when I first saw my first demon. Of course, that was really unsettling as a teenager without any spiritual mentor to help me through that. Because at the same time, I was having a lot of positive spiritual visions, but then there was negative stuff coming through too. So tell me, Boo Boo, what would you like to know about each type of entity? Do you want to know what they look like, or what their
What do they look
intention
like?
is?
Yeah, what's their
Maybe.
purpose,
What's
their
their purpose?
intention, and where do they come from?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. The where do they come from? I don't have all of the answers to all of those. I'm still in the process of figuring those out, some of those out. So demons, for example, um, in my experience, I don't believe in the Judeo-Christian story of the angels that fell from heaven, um, and those are what the demons are. That's just not been my experience as I've encountered lots of demons. I am able to see into the afterlife, and I do see many of them in the lower realms. But if that is where they came from, I can't say for sure. But I'll talk a little bit about what they look like. For me, they always present as humanoid, so they're like about human size. And most of the time they will have horns. I've seen ones with little stubby horns. I've seen ram's horns, different sizes of horns. And when I've seen that type of demon, it has been when it was possessing a person. So I would be standing in front of a person, and this was not in client sessions. This was like, I am just living my life and I'm talking to a person, and all of a sudden I go into my clairvoyant mode and I see their face, the person's face shifts, and there is a demon face superimposed. So it's like I'm seeing both the person's face and the demon and the horns. I saw the big horns. And then I suddenly knew, oh, that explains this person's behavior, because the person was very disturbed. And then I've also seen a lot of demons that are creature-like. So they're like kind of a cross between flying monkeys and gargoyles type of, and they're small in size, lower in intelligence because they're creatures, and then the more human-looking ones are more average human intelligence. And then, so now I'm going back up the hierarchy. So we've got the creatures, and then we've got the like the mid-range demons that are more humanoid looking. And then I've encountered some that are the higher ranking demons, and they usually present more as an energy that's like they look like it has a subtle human form, but it's more like black smoke, I guess is how I would describe it. Like black smoke in a humanoid form, super, super dark, extremely high intelligence. So as we go up the hierarchy, extremely high intelligence and very highly powerful. And those high-ranking demons are more rare. The mid-range and then the creature type are very common. I see those all around, attached to people or inside of people. But the higher-ranking ones are more rare, and those are the cases where, people like the horror movies where people are speaking in tongues and speaking foreign languages and levitating off their bed, and because if that type of demon enters into a person, then they're in real trouble. So we've got the demons, and then another kind of entity that I've had a lot of encounters with is the jinn. Before 2016, I did not know what a jinn was. I had heard of genies and the cute movies about 3 wishes and everything, but the movies and the fairy tales about jinn or genies, that's not even close to the truth of what they really are. So jinn, I've actually seen them in their true form, so I've actually seen them in 3 forms. Their true form is plasma. It's like this energy, okay? The Quran calls it smokeless fire. The Quran talks a lot about jinn. And by the way, jinn are not just existing in the Middle East. I've seen them everywhere. I've worked with clients all over the world, and they're not just in the Middle East. So smokeless fire, plasma, energy in like not an exact ball, but in an area. So plasma energy taking up space. The second form that they will take is more of a human form. That's every time I've seen them, they look Middle Eastern. They have Middle Eastern features. And they usually present as very handsome. I've encountered one female, and all the rest of them have been male. And they all present as very, very good looking and very suave and very charismatic. But the third way that I've seen them present is in their shape-shifted form. So jinn are master shapeshifters. That is the biggest takeaway that I want you all to take from this information about jinn, is that they will shapeshift into anything. They'll shapeshift into an angel. They'll shapeshift into Jesus. They'll shapeshift into your deceased loved one. Just like anything that you can imagine, they will shapeshift into it. I've seen a jinn shapeshift into a council of angels. I had an encounter with a jinn where it shapeshifted into a council of aliens because it was trying to pretend that it was this council of aliens in order to channel messages through me. It wanted me to give consent. Like, yes, oh, that would be really cool. I want to be a famous channeler. And it was trying to get me to consent to let it come in and work with me. But because I had so much experience with jinn, I knew exactly, I was like, I know exactly what a jinn feels like, looks like, etc., acts like. So I wasn't fooled. But anything that you can imagine, I've actually seen jinn shapeshift into demons too.
Hmm.
This one particular jinn that was trying to fool me into thinking that it was a council of aliens, when that didn't work, it shifted into a whole group, a whole pantheon of Greek gods and goddesses. And they all said, "We're here to work with you," blah, blah, blah. I said, "No, I don't think that this is true. I think this is a jinn." And then that council of gods and goddesses shifted into demons. And I said, well, this is really interesting. So showing up as benevolent beings didn't work. So now it's trying to scare me. Yes. And I was like, those aren't even real demons. I mean, so it gets really tricky. Jinn are really tricky. I hate jinn. They are worse than demons. They're psychopaths. They are psychopaths. They don't, if anyone suspects that they have a jinn attachment, do not take a direct approach in clearing them. I know in the Catholic Church, the exorcism approach is to be very assertive and aggressive about using the exorcism practice to force the demons out. If you do that with a jinn, things will get very bad. I'll talk about this in a future book, but I'll just say I've had experiences where I've set very assertive boundaries with them, and the backlash was really unexpected. Yeah, it's bad. So if anyone is dealing with a jinn, try to find backdoor ways to clear it. This is something that I help people with in my program. Let's go over. So we've got demons, jinn. What else do we want to? So let's talk about something that's really common, just to kind of round it out, to have 3 of the most common types of entities. Let's talk about discarnate human souls. So discarnate means that it's a person who's no longer alive. For whatever reason, that person didn't go into the light. They didn't go into the tunnel to go through to the afterlife. They decided, or either they decided or accidentally stayed on the earth plane. And so they're still hanging out here on earth instead of moving on to wherever else they need to be. The thing is even with a friendly spirit, they have to maintain their life force energy in some way, shape, or form. And the way that they do it is by sourcing life force energy off of the living beings. So even if somebody has a friendly spirit in their house, that friendly spirit is still sucking life force energy off of the people in the house, and we don't really want that. But then, of course, we have negative spirits. We have those that passed over that are very troubled. Just like human beings that are alive, we have the whole spectrum of discarnate human souls. We've got those that are good, we've got those that are kind of a mixture in between, and then we've got those that are really evil. And so it is very common for people to have a ghost or a spirit in their house, especially if they live in an older home. And so I personally, through my work, what I've seen is people get attached to having a spirit in their house, like, oh, it's so cool, but it's actually not beneficial. I recommend people clear out, I recommend that people have their space clean and clear. And even if it's a friendly ghost, you're not helping that spirit by letting it hang around. Like, it really needs to move on. So do the nice thing and let it move on. So I could go on and on about the different types of entities, but I think 3 is probably a good number to start with today. What
Yeah,
else would
thank
you
you.
like
And
to know? Sure.
yeah, I appreciate it. And maybe for the skeptic, you can share roughly about how many people have you worked with And briefly of the history of how you developed
Yeah.
this list of their strategies,
Hmm.
their
Hmm.
tactics.
Yeah, I don't have an exact number of how many people I've worked with. I'm going to say thousands. And I've worked with different people in different capacities. So there's people that I've worked with very closely as one-on-one clients. And then there are people that I've worked with in groups. And then there are people who've had exposure to my books and my other content. So it's hard to nail down a number, but a lot of people over the years. And because of the numbers of people that I've worked with, this is why I've been able to get a grasp on patterns of the dark forces, for example, which is what we're going to talk about today, like very common tactics of the dark forces, how they operate, because person after person, client after client after client, student after student would have these similar issues, same issues over and over again. But let's take a second to talk about how I got started into this. I've shared about this in at least one of our past videos, so I'll just keep this brief. So I actually was a spiritual teacher. So at my current age, it's been over 30 years that I've been working in the field of spirituality. But for the first couple decades of that, I was what I call I was working in the field of feel-good spirituality. So I was doing all of the stuff that's really fluffy and feels good. And I just want to say, we need the feel-good spirituality. Life is hard on this planet, so we need the things that are uplifting, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's where I was entrenched. And back then, if somebody had told me, Maya, you're going to end up specializing in psychic protection. You're going to be working with dark entities. You're going to be working with all these things. I would have said, you're crazy. That's totally cray. There's no way that I'm going to do that. Because back then, even though I was into all the feel-good stuff, I had enough sense to know that the negative spiritual aspects do exist, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But then in 2016, my rose-colored glasses got smushed because I went to a colleague for a session, and I did not realize that what she thought was a council of angels that she's been working with for decades was actually a jinn. And again, before 2016, I didn't even know what a jinn was. But now, years later, I've had multiple encounters with them, and I totally know all about them, exactly how they operate. But back then, it was extremely confusing, because not only was I dealing with an entity that I didn't know anything about, but jinn are known for being tricksters, and they love to create confusion. So they want to they want to turn a person's life upside down. They want to, on purpose, shapeshift into all these different things so the person doesn't know what the heck is going on. And that's exactly what was happening with me. I actually thought that I was under attack by demons at first, because that's what the jinn was presenting as. And by the way, since I know we won't have time to go into all of the really interesting aspects of the multi-layered story of what I went through, I do go through this entire story in my first book, Darkness Disguised as Light, because it literally, when I retell the story from start to finish, it takes like 3 hours. We don't have that much time today, but it was definitely mind-bending and really scary, all the stuff that was happening. It was, the scariest part was that I didn't understand what was happening. And at one point I did capture the image of the plasma-like energy on video. I was taking a video for my
Wow.
students. I was doing an educational video, and it actually appeared behind me when I was not living here, thank goodness. So it's not back there, but it was a couple of, it was when I was living in a whole other city. And so I actually saw it on the camera. And then I also had an incident when things really came to a climax where I figured out what was happening. Once I figured out what, like, oh, this is a jinn, this is a shapeshifter, and it's coming from this person. Once I figured that out, then the attack really ramped up, and it was a him. He actually attacked me in the middle of the night. I was sound asleep, and I woke up with this plasma-like energy over me. And then, even though it was in plasma form, it actually the energy reached down into my shoulders and tried to yank my soul out of my body.
Wow.
And I don't even know how to describe what that feels like, but out of everything in my entire life, that was the scariest moment of my life. So, making a very long story a little bit shorter, I was able to get free of that entity with a little bit of help from some outside people, but mostly figuring it out on my own. And it was a tough journey. It took about 6 weeks to get from start to finish to get through that psychic attack. And then after that, I realized I know I'm not the only one going through this kind of issue. And one of my frustrations was when I tried to talk to my colleagues about it, they just came back with all of the common myths of, well, negative entities don't exist. You're making this up. That didn't really happen to you, or it's just a figment of your imagination. And I'm like, I got it on camera. Like this really happened to me. And so I was very frustrated that in my whole community, there was no help. There was no help, especially in the New Age community. They just said, well, you're creating it through your negative thoughts, like all this other nonsense, victim shamey kind of stuff. And at that time, I made a very strong commitment because I had just gone through something very traumatic, and I made the commitment. I said, this was actually in the middle of the night. In a prayer, I said, I know I'm not the only person who's gone through this. And when I get through this, which I did, I want to help other people with these issues, because I just thought, I don't want anyone else to feel like I'm feeling not only the terror of the attack, but also to not have any support. Actually, I lost almost my entire community. All the feel-good spiritual people unfriended me, blocked me. I lost my entire community, pretty much. And I said, all these other people who are going through various levels of psychic attack, maybe their family doesn't believe them, or they don't know who to turn to. And I'm going to step up and do this work. And so it's definitely not easy work, but I have this very strong conviction to help people going through these issues that a lot of the feel-good practitioners don't want to acknowledge that these things exist, and they do. So that's how I've come to this knowledge, is through personal experience, and then after that, years of working with lots of different people. At first, I was working locally. I was living in the Midwest. And then now, for the last several years, I've worked with people all over the world online. So I've been able to see all of these common patterns and tactics that the dark forces take with people.
Thank you. Well, let's get into some of them,
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
some fascinating ones. So maybe we'll start off with number one, if you don't mind. Dark forces want you to
Yeah.
believe you are not powerful.
The dark forces want you to believe that you are not powerful. So first of all, I'll preface this by saying that in my work with clients, I was seeing them struggle with patterns, like things issues would come up for them, and they would be struggling, and I would be seeing it with like 10 different people at once. And I was like, I need to make a list, because when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to have the brain cells to take this stuff in. But if you learn about this ahead of time, and for example, the dark forces want you to believe that you are not powerful. If you hear this now, when you're not under major psychic attack, or if you are, if there's someone watching this and you are under attack, you can take this in as well. But knowing that the whole intention that the dark forces have is to make you think, to make you believe that they are more powerful than you are. And it's a mind game. It's a mental trick to get you to back down. Because here's the thing, if you actually knew that you are as powerful, if not more powerful, than the demon or the entity or whatever form of the dark forces that you're dealing with, if you knew how powerful you are, then you would stand up to it. Like, when we are fully cognizant and we are totally embodying our power, like we don't just know it up here, and you're not just hearing the words or reading them in my book, but you totally know in your bones, in your blood, how powerful you are. You will be at the point where you can command a negative entity to leave your energy field. You can simply command it to leave, and it will. But it's not just the negative entities that want you to think that you're not powerful. It's really built into our matrix reality. We are indoctrinated as children to always look to our authorities for the answers. Our authorities are the ones in power. We don't know as much as they do. And so as children, we're always looking outside of ourselves for where the power is, whether it's our parents, our teachers, our God, whatever the religion is that we're brought up with. And so in correlation to that, when we encounter a negative entity, we have this underlying belief that spiritual beings are more powerful than we are. There's a lot of indoctrination into that in religions, because there's this belief that God is more powerful than you are, and you have to fear God. You have to fear God. I'm not equating God to a negative entity, but it's still this parallel belief system that says that, like, the spirit world is more powerful than you are, and you have to subjugate yourself to it. And that whole, like, basic structure, that foundation, sets us up to then, as adults, if we have any encounters with negative spiritual forces, our subconscious believes that we are not powerful. So it's built in, and the dark forces want it that way, right? So a lot of times when students join my program and they're dealing with a psychic attack and I'm helping them clear it, the biggest obstacle and the biggest breakthrough that they achieve, and it takes however long it takes, a few months, several months, for them to finally embody how powerful they are, to finally stand up to the entity and say, get the F out of my field. Because I can clear it. I can clear the entity for them, but the entity will keep coming back if it thinks that it can. If it thinks that you won't set boundaries because you're too afraid to. There's all this subconscious programming that we deal with about not being powerful. And so really this number one tactic of the dark forces is really the key for anybody to get totally free of any chronic psychic attack, chronic entity attachments, or those of you who are dealing with overall spiritual targeting by the dark forces. The key is to finally come into your power, to be able to command your energy. And then when you get to that point, there's really not much that can touch you.
Wow. Thank you. You brought up religion, and you brought up religion, and I automatically started to think about egregores. Can we create this egregore that makes us believe and get us trapped in that we're not powerful? I mean, you look at the Roman Empire and
Mhm.
what they did to the Gnostics, and the Gnostics were very empowering about the teachings of Jesus, not so much like in the Gospel of Thomas, not who
Mhm.
Jesus was, but who you are. But they took that away, where you have to look up to Jesus and you're just a sinner type mentality. And you hear
Mhm.
that in a lot of other groupthink communities, egregores, um, that are overpower us until we remember who we really are and how empowering we truly are.
Yeah. 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 So, just for the sake of your viewers, an egregore is a thought form entity. It's actually energy that is created by thoughts, beliefs, and it ends up developing its own consciousness. And it's like, as you were talking, I was thinking that it's really equivalent to, even though it has its own consciousness, so we can think of it as an entity, it's also like a matrix program. It's like this cloud over a whole group of people. It's like a program that's emitting a frequency down to the people of whatever the program might be. So you were speaking of the people not being empowered, that they have to worship some other being or give their power away. That's part of the egregore that you're talking about. I do think that there are programs, frequencies that are imposed upon our planet, upon humanity. I do think that it's that these are things that are created by elements of the dark forces, because benevolent forces really don't need to engage in that kind of nonsense, right?
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Another one would be dark forces will interfere with your efforts to get help.
Yes. So let me give you an example. Dark forces will interfere with your efforts to get help. Let's say you're dealing with some kind of entity issue or some kind of negative spiritual interference. And you're thinking, okay, I need to find someone to help me. And so you start looking online and you're trying to find help. Um, and actually, I'm going to give you a real example. I know someone who was being psychically attacked by a spiritual master, a dark spiritual master. This person was being spiritually attacked in really awful ways. And so this person was trying to find help. So they actually ended up finding my book in the local bookstore in the city where I used to live. And they took it, they bought it, they put it on the shelf, and they were going to read it. Every time they would think, oh, I need to read that book because I think there's information in there that's going to help me, they would get a headache. Their head would hurt so bad. And then it was like their brain was put in a blender. Like they would lose their train of thought. And then 3 weeks later, they would remember my book again. This was after I'd written my first book. So I just had one book out at the time. And this person told me it that it took them a year to finally break through this dark forces interference. They were trying to educate themselves by reading the book, and it took them a whole year to get through all of that interference to getting help, that they finally read the book, and then they finally reached out and started working with me. But there was all this interference. Now, I want to point out the fact that the interference might seem mundane, like non-spiritual to people who don't believe. Like the person had a headache or they suddenly lost their train of thought. But again, I've worked with thousands of people and I've seen this pattern over and over again, that when somebody, let's say they've just decided to start working with me, and then all of a sudden there's weird stuff that happens with their computer, or the electricity goes off at their house, or or they're wanting to get on Zoom to talk to me, and now their Zoom doesn't work. And that is actually a sign that they are going the right direction. If you encounter interference like that, it means that the dark forces are threatened by what you're getting ready to do. So let's say you're getting ready to do your own spiritual cleansing ritual that you've come up with. And all of a sudden, like your dog runs away, and like your car breaks down and you can't get back home to do your ritual. And like all these weird things happen that someone who doesn't believe in this stuff would say, oh, that's just normal life. But those of us who know better, we know this is interference getting thrown into the mix so that you can't do the thing that's going to help you, whether it's working with me, whether it's doing your own work, doing a ritual, picking up a book that's going to help you. There's all of these interferences that happen. And I will say this, the dark forces would not bother to throw in that interference if they weren't threatened by what you were about to do. So this is what I tell people is it really takes a stubborn soul to break through psychic attack, entity interference, dark forces, targeting, etc. It takes a stubborn soul. When that dark forces interference happens, when you're getting ready to do the thing that's going to help you, whatever it is, and you get this backlash happening, however it shows up, then you go, aha, there's the backlash. That means I'm going the right direction. And really all it is, usually it's just psychological warfare. Like if your car doesn't start, yeah, you got to deal with getting it fixed. But mostly whatever interference shows up, it's to get you to either feel afraid or discouraged and to back down. So again, the dark forces will interfere with your efforts to get help. They will try to block your computer or whatever, or they will throw things into your life to get you to feel like, oh my gosh, I better stop what I'm doing because all this stuff is happening and I feel afraid. That's what they want. They want you to back down and stop. So you got to be a stubborn soul and say, and give the dark forces your middle finger and just be like, F off, because I'm going to do this thing that I'm getting ready to do, clearing session with Maya or whatever. I'm going to do it. And you push through and you keep going. And then what happens is that when there's that interference on the front end, sometimes, not always, there's that interference on the front end, you push through it, and then the dark forces back off because it's like they realize that effort didn't work. So you just keep pushing through. So the dark forces will try to interfere with your efforts to get help.
Thank you. Our first episode, we kind of scared people and kind of had a little bit of confusion with the addiction part.
Oh, okay.
Remember with the addiction attachments? And your list, number 19, it says dark forces will encourage substance abuse and addiction. And the reason why I bring this up, because you talked about losing your train of thought. All of a sudden, the person will lose their train of thought. Well, in the 12-step community, they'll talk about having a strange mental blank spot. And next thing you know, they're drinking or using again. So that brought up that dark forces will encourage substance abuse and addiction.
Yeah.
You can share on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. So, I'm sorry that truth was upsetting for some people. I've talked with people in person and online who when they would hear about this, it was very troubling to them, and they felt kind of overwhelmed and like, oh my gosh, it's hopeless, and thoughts like that. But my perspective is that the more information you have about what's going on, the better. So if you know that one of the tactics of the dark forces is to encourage addictive behaviors. So let's say somebody is dealing with an addiction and they're they're trying to go into recovery, but they are struggling. It's actually helpful to know that there's a spiritual element going on. There can be some spiritual forces that are messing with the person. And so it can actually be helpful to do some work with someone who specializes in psychic protection, or working with a very ethical shaman to help clear off some of that interference. And so I will say, I feel like it is never hopeless. I think it's very hopeful to know that there's this spiritual element going on that's in the mix. And if we can address the negative spiritual element, then it can definitely help give people a leg up on their recovery process.
I really appreciate that,
Yeah.
because we talk in the 12-step community, they talk about a spiritual malady, but it
Yeah.
can be so much more broader than what they understand
Yeah.
from when it was written. And it brings us back to step two. Step two, the number two, the dark forces will interfere with your efforts to get help,
Yeah.
because all of a
Mhm.
sudden the people are saying they're not ready yet. They can't be honest,
Mhm.
but it's so
Mhm.
much deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, some of these tactics blend into each other,
Yeah.
because let's
Oh,
say somebody is getting ready to get help for some spiritual warfare issues, um, and or addiction. Okay. And then all of a sudden their addiction cravings ramp up. That's actually an interference to getting help. So
mm.
ramping up the addiction is actually one way to interfere with someone. And I actually do have current people in my program that are dealing with addiction, and as well as past students. And it is important to have a multifaceted approach to work with your 12-step program or your support system, whatever that might be, to work on root causes of the addiction, whether it's childhood trauma or other. There's all sorts of complex reasons, complex ways that affect people, and then also to address the spiritual element as well.
Wow, I could use this whole list with addiction alone. It's amazing. Dark forces will
Yeah.
try to use your unhealed wounds against you, and the core of addiction for a lot of
Yeah.
science is saying, like Gabor Mate, is trauma, and
Yeah.
that means wounds, and they're using your wounds against you
Uh-huh.
to heal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Number three, you came up with the term in the book, spiritual inversions. The dark forces will create spiritual inversions. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, this was something that I didn't discover until I was working with a group of students, and they were having this happen. So the term that I came up with is spiritual inversions. Inversion means it's like turned upside down. So I've had students who were having these weird experiences where things that would normally be thought of as positive spiritual experiences were being hijacked by the dark forces.
Hmm.
So, for example, they would see 444 on their clock, which a lot of people nowadays see that as a sacred number, like, oh, that's good news, happy, oh, look at that, angel numbers, etc. And that is true. Those are that's benevolent, positive numerology that's showing up, or 1111 showing up on your device. But this particular person was having these experiences where what would normally be considered beneficial, benevolent numerology showing up in their world, and then all of a sudden they would be attacked by dark forces. This person was dealing with black magic and entities both. So they would see 1111 on their clock, and then 30 seconds later, whammo, they would have major paranormal activity. And it was really interesting to support her through that, because what I mentioned before is that when you're in the middle of something, when you're in the thick of it and it's very traumatic and scary, and there's someone trying to explain to you what's going on. Like, okay, this is dark forces are hijacking these benevolent frequencies, these benevolent numbers, and this is what's happening. She wasn't able to receive that information at that time because it was just too freaky and overwhelming. And that was what actually prompted me to start teaching my students about it ahead of time. There's this thing called spiritual inversions. This is so when they join my program, they get all this information and like, here's something that can happen when you're going through, like when you're stepping up into your personal and spiritual empowerment and you're clearing everything out. This spiritual inversion thing is something that can happen. So we talked about spiritual inversion with sacred numbers, with numerology, but I've seen other people experience it with solfeggio frequencies, with sound healing frequencies that are actually usually beneficial and benevolent. So like 528 hertz is a beneficial frequency. But when this person would listen to that frequency, they would experience a spiritual inversion because all this they would deal with like all of the negative entities would come in and attack them. So I want to emphasize the spiritual inversions are it's not super common. So it's not like, I guess what I'll say is most people, when they listen to solfeggio frequency, sacred sound healing music, they have a beneficial experience. And then there's a small percentage of people who will end up having issues with spiritual inversions where weird stuff happens when they think that they are seeing an angel number or hearing positive frequencies or whatever else that might be usually seen as beneficial. It is negative for them. And it gets to be very confusing and scary. Like the people that have experienced spiritual inversions, like it was very scary for them at the time because they were like, I don't understand what's happening. I thought angel numbers were supposed to be positive, and now why is this happening? So it's like they go into this existential crisis kind of thing. But I'll back away and say that there is another common tactic that I see the dark forces engage in, and it's that dark forces will hijack, will piggyback onto things that would normally be seen as benevolent. So, and there's another one, I forget what number it is, but on the list. But if someone is going through a spiritual awakening, let's say they are going through a big spiritual awakening, their psychic abilities are opening up, and all of this amazing stuff is happening to them, then sometimes the dark forces, a particular entity or dark forces in general, will hijack that, will jump in and turn that whole thing into a whirlwind so it turns into a psychic attack. I have this gut feeling like you're going to have at least a couple people who watch this video who have gone through a spiritual awakening and then it got really confusing and weird and dark and they didn't understand why. And that is why. It's an example of a spiritual inversion. This is where the dark forces have hijacked a person's authentic, genuine spiritual awakening and turned it into something negative.
Wow. Thank you. Number 10, dark forces will send energy vampires and boundary violators into your life.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay, let me get a drink because I'm serious about talking about this one.
I felt that.
There's actually a few of these tactics that really blend together. So let's kind of mush these together. So we've got the tactic that dark forces will send people who are energy vampires, people who will suck your life force energy either through their behaviors or maybe they do have esoteric knowledge and they know how to manage energy and they're mishandling energy. Either way is an energy vampire, whether they're aware that they're doing it or unaware. But then there's also other kinds of people that can be sent into our lives other kinds of toxic people, abusers, even negative romantic partners. So there's a whole chapter. I'll just jump ahead and say there's a whole chapter on relationships and sex in the Psychic Attack Sourcebook, talking about spiritual targeting in relation to relationships and sex, where the relationships can get hijacked, or hijacked individuals can be sent into a person's life to either manage the person, keep the person down. Let's say the person is getting ready to have a spiritual awakening and really do amazing things in the world, and the spiritual partner is sent into their life on purpose. The partner might not know it, but dark forces know. They're sending that person into that other person's life to keep them down. Maybe the partner is very abusive, or the partner has entity attachments, or the partner is an energy vampire. So right now I'm talking about romantic partners, but this can also be friends sent into our life, random strangers sent into your life, coworkers, boss, all sorts of things. All of these different kinds of people can be sent into your life really with the intent to keep you down and to just suck your life force energy, and even to bring lots of drama, so that you're so busy dealing with the headaches and the drama that you don't really have the time to evolve personally and spiritually. And that's what the dark forces want for certain individuals, but for humanity overall. The dark forces don't want people feeling good and spiritually expanding and developing and growing. The dark forces want people asleep and stressed out and with their vibrations low, right? And so I'm pretty sure there are people that are going to watch this video who are going to be like, oh, I'm thinking of this one person in particular in my life, I think was sent into my life to hold me down. Yeah. So I definitely encourage anyone who's watching this right now to just take a second and think, is there anybody in my life who would fit into that? And a lot of times they have no idea that that's their role. But whatever, it's what you can do as an increasingly empowered person. You can decide who has access to you in your life.
I was just thinking, do you believe there's certain groups, you hear about the elites or the hidden hand,
Yeah.
that's controlling everything, that owns everything. Do you believe
Yeah.
they're working with these dark forces?
Yes, I do. I do. I personally have had a lot more super clear visions and encounters with entities and groups of entities. I haven't had as many direct visions about the cabal, about the dark forces of humanity. So what I'm going to say, how I'm going to answer, is more a very strong claircognizant knowing. It's like my psychic knowing. So I haven't seen things through spiritual visions, but through psychic knowing. I know that there's not only the spiritual dark forces that I've seen a lot of, but there's also the human dark forces, which I call the cabal. A lot of people call it the cabal, the dark human forces running things behind the curtain. That I think they all work together. It's my psychic knowing, my spidey sense knowing that many of those in the dark human cabal, they don't even know that they're being run by negative spiritual forces. Because it's actually the negative spiritual forces that are running the show. It's the spiritual forces that are running the show. And then many who are the human beings, the dark human beings, they don't know that they have entity attachments and other forces that are influencing them to do these things in the world. And then there actually are members of the Dark Cabal who are actively working with dark spiritual forces. They're actively working with, whatever dark entity, you fill in the blank. There's more than one that some of these Cabal members are working with, and they think, so the humans think that they are in control, in power, and that they are calling upon this or that entity to give them more power and to do what they want. But actually, it's the dark entities that are running the show. So, yes, it's all kind of intermingled together. But from what I see and what I know, is actually the spiritual beings that are running things. And then the human beings, in their ego sense, they assume that they're the ones in charge, but they don't know how much they're being influenced. And let me just give you an example. People don't realize how frequently there are spiritual entities that are telepathically communicating with humans. So there are lots of times when a person will have a thought that they think is their own thought, but it's not coming from them. It's coming from a spiritual source. And so there are so many times when members of the human cabal, but what I'm talking about is all of humanity is affected by negative entities and negative messages coming through to them through the spiritual dark forces, telepathic thoughts, feelings, nudges, etc. But these ego-driven members of the cabal, they assume that these plans that they've come up with are from their own making, when it's actually thoughts and intentions and plans that are given to them by these negative spiritual forces. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah.
You got my mind going. Number 22
Yeah,
and
I could
23 are
keep going down that rabbit hole, but let's go on to the next thing.
number 22 and 23 are pretty interesting. Dark
Yeah.
forces will try to draw you into harmful spiritual practices. That's
Yeah.
22.
Mm-hmm. So in that one, I am so the dark forces try to draw you into negative, harmful spiritual practices. In that tactic, I am really referring to a lot of the false light activity that's going on. So, and also all of the practices that encourage disembodiment. So let's talk about that first. So disembodiment. So there are a lot of popular practices, whether it's particular meditation practices. I'm not anti-meditation, but there are certain practices, or whether it's astral travel practices, whatever, that's taking you out of your body. Okay? Whatever the practice may be, fill in the blank, because there's a million on the planet right now. So the idea is to encourage the person so the dark forces want to encourage a person to participate in practices that are going to disconnect them from their body, disconnect them from being grounded and anchored in their body. If they can get the person to leave their body or to be out floating in la la land where they think that, oh, I'm this ultra enlightened spiritual being and I'm exploring higher realms, and meanwhile, the person is getting infested with entity attachments. Because the thing is when you're not home, burglars like to come and ransack your home. If you're not home, all sorts of stuff can happen. So any spiritual practices that encourage you to leave your body or to be not fully anchored and grounded and aware. There's also a lot of practices that encourage being in a blissed out state instead of a calm, grounded, yet uplifted state. And those are all practices that make it very easy for entities to attach. And the more entity attachments somebody has, the better, according to the dark forces, because that person is being fed upon and disempowered. And then I originally mentioned about the false light practices. I've been thinking a lot about this week because I just finished my third book, and I'm thinking about what I want to write next. And the next book might possibly be a focus on false light entities in the New Age and beyond. But I've been just really noticing how more and more and more, it seems like it's building, how popular channeling is. And I have so much respect to all the spiritual workers out there, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I have had these firsthand encounters with, at first it started off as a jinn, right? I had that encounter, but then through my personal life and my client work, I've had numerous experiences with not only jinn, but other trickster entities. And what I've seen over and over again is that people who think that they are channeling messages from supposed benevolent spiritual beings, 9 times out of 10, it's actually a trickster entity that is very good at tricking people. And the idea is to share 80% lovely truths in the channeling. Dear ones, we are here to give you a message of hope and light for all humanity. So 80% uplifting messages of love and light, and then 20% is strategically placed lies or misdirection. So this is actually extremely common in the New Age right now and in other spiritual practices, all of the channeling. And the dark forces would really like to encourage people to take part in these practices, because it's basically taking the person off of genuine reality and putting them into like an alternate, it's like putting them into an alternate reality where they're having all of these experiences that are not real. I actually have worked with a client who said that they had months of thinking they were having all of these spiritual experiences, and it was all caused by the false light entity that they were dealing with. And it was literally like an alternate reality. And what does that do? It actually takes the person off of their genuine soul mission, why they are really here. And so it took that person a while to like get back into actual reality. And so the idea is overall to get the person engaged with spiritual activities that are going to make them ungrounded, easy for entities to attach to, or to get involved with all sorts of illusions and off track to their genuine soul mission.
Thank you. I want to ask you one more, if that's okay.
Sure.
Gaslighting is a famous term used today. And number 4, it says the dark forces will gaslight you into believing that helpful things are harmful.
Yeah, so the dark forces will gaslight you into believing that helpful things are harmful. Now, this actually ties in, this weaves back into dark forces will interfere with your efforts to get help. So let's say you're getting ready to do something that you think would be helpful, but then all of a sudden there are telepathic thoughts placed into your mind. All of a sudden you're filled with fear. Oh my gosh, if I do this thing, it's going to harm me. Okay. And then, oh gosh, and I've had a lot of clients who, over the years, who, when they were under attack or when they had an entity attachment, let's say we're dealing with someone who has an entity attachment, they would be getting ready to do something that was helpful to them. Like, okay, let's say I've got this essential oil here that's for uplifting my mood. Okay. Well, the entity puts a scary thought into my mind and into my heart that if I use this, if I sniff this to uplift my mood, oh my gosh, if I do that, all these terrible things are going to happen. Demons are going to attack me, or fill in the blank with whatever horrible thing. This is actually something that I've seen with a lot of people, that whether it's something that they were getting ready to do to clear the entity, but it could be something mundane, like I was getting ready to take this supplement that's going to help me to heal, but the dark forces want me to stay sick. And so I was suddenly filled with this program, this message that hit me that was like, oh my gosh, this bottle of whatever is going to poison you. And that sounds really outlandish, but I've worked with so many people that have had that happen. And again, I'm getting this gut feeling that you're going to have people watching this who are going to go, oh my God, like light bulb moment. That's why that happens to me. Whenever I reach for this thing that's supposed to help me, I suddenly get overwhelmed with fear or a thought that this thing is going to hurt me. And that's on purpose. Again, all of these tactics, every single tactic in the book that I talk about, the whole idea is to keep you down. Keep you down.
Thank you. You know, to leave on a positive note.
Yes.
What's the
Oh my gosh, yes.
what's the solution? How
Heavy
do we
stuff.
how do we stay protected and grounded and
Yeah. Yeah.
protect ourselves?
Yeah. You know, it's funny because like just to talk about ending on a positive note. Usually when people find me, when they seek out my website, they're ready for the truth. Like they've found out that the fluffy stuff isn't working for them, and they're ready to get slapped with like all the hard stuff, you know. But when I'm a visitor on someone else's channel, it can be a little bit jarring, right? But how to stay grounded and how to stay empowered. The first thing that I thought of when you asked that was the very first thing that we talked about in the list of tactics of the dark forces. They want you to believe that you are not powerful. The most important thing that you can learn and develop and grow into is to become the version of you, that knows in your blood and your bones that you are powerful, and you are the one who is in charge of your energy, and you are sovereign. You are the one that has authority over your energy and your life, and any person, situation, or entity or force that's negative that tries to enter in, you have the authority to make it leave. So that's my message of hope and groundedness and embodiment for everyone. I also want to gently say, it's easy to hear those words like, yes, you have authority, you are powerful, yada, yada, yada. It's easy to hear it, and for your mind to understand it, it takes a while to really become that person that really knows it in your blood and bones. So I just encourage everyone to make the decision today to work on becoming that person who knows that you are powerful, that you are the authority in your life, and let go of all of those past programs that told you that the shadow government is in charge of you, or that the negative entities are in charge of you, or your boss is controlling you. All of those things. Let go of all of that programming, because it's all matrix programming. Let go of that programming. It's not real. And step into this new you who is fully in authority of yourself in all ways.
Maya, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I feel like there's so much more to talk about in chapter 5, because you talk about who's not targeted. You talked about something about those who are unconsciously living are lessly to be targeted. Some are mildly targeted, and others are heavily targeted. And we didn't even get into that or that list, that report list of attachments.
Yeah,
There
and
was
we
some,
really only, I mean, how many tactics are there? Like 25, I think.
yeah,
And we
27.
only 27. Yeah, we only talked about a few. So if you guys want to read the rest of them to understand, because the more you understand, it's like the game of war. I mean, when you understand how the enemy is operating, and I'm not trying to use such negative words here, but this is the most concise way to put it. If you understand how the enemy is operating and they throw the cannonball at you and you go, oh, I know what that is. It's just this or that. And then it disintegrates. When you know what it is, it loses a lot of its power, and that's a good thing. So the more you know about these tactics, the more of an upper hand you have. So I definitely encourage people to get the book. Can I tell people where to find me?
Sure, please.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got 3 books now on Amazon, and 2 of them are on Audible. And the book that we were talking about today is called The Psychic Attack Source Book. You can find that on Amazon. And then also for more information about how to work with me, the main way to work with me is through my group mentoring program that's so powerful. You can find out about that at psychicprotectionsanctuary.com and click on Work with Maya. And then if you're looking for just like some free resources, you can go to my YouTube channel. That's called Psychic Protection Sanctuary. And I also have a free Facebook group that's it's mainly just the place where we have a free monthly class, but we have a daily discussion post as well. And that Facebook group is called Psychic Protection Sanctuary as well. So there's a lot of different ways that people, like a lot of different tiers of how people can get help.
Thank you. And I appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Boo Boo. It's wonderful talking with you as always.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a break. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding.